How's that? Good morning, everybody. How we doing? Lovely Monday morning here in Miami. Shucks, huh? How many out-of-towners do we have? One? My goodness. So exciting to be here. I can't believe that Emerge Americas is in its 6th year. It seems like just yesterday when this venture started some 6 years ago, and here we are. So I wanted to welcome everybody. I am Sebastian Rosk, and I will be your host for the extent of the event, both today and tomorrow here on the awesome Launchpad stage. Now, before we get started, I want to remind you, Emerge Americas is here to actually help transform Miami into the tech hub of the Americas by partnering with the entire tech and entrepreneur ecosystem, whether it's government to higher ed, startups to investors, corporate enterprises to media. We're helping connect the dots between entrepreneurs, investors, and talent, and we're attracting the best and the brightest from around the world. We want them to come to Miami to launch, to build, and become successfully able to scale their ideas. And we believe that the rise of Miami can serve as a gateway to the Americas and help bridge the divide and fuel innovation by building out a sustainable, diverse, and inclusive ecosystem. Here to kick us off today with the latest cannabis trends in entrepreneurship, please welcome Ginder Zagzebski. That's a toughie, Xander. Corporate and business partner at Greenspoon Marder. Next, we have Anton, Handal, intellectual property and litigation practice group's partner, Greenspoon Marder, senior counsel, cannabis law practice group, and Greenspoon Marder, Matthew Ginder and Katya Fisher, a partner at Greenspoon Marder as the moderator. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to listen to us talk a little bit about new trends in the cannabis industry here in Florida and nationwide. Why don't we get started with Matt? Why don't you give us just a basic overview about the state of the industry nationally and what the trends are that we're currently seeing?
Sure. Thank you, and thanks for having us. Cannabis industry is one of the most fascinating and evolving industries. Every day something happens in this space, and it's evolving just literally, day by day. What makes this industry unique from any other emerging industry is the elephant in the room that it's federally illegal still. It's pretty incredible that the federal government still schedules marijuana, considers it a controlled substance, a Schedule I, which is equivalent to heroin and LSD. But notwithstanding that, we've seen states move forward with legalization of marijuana in some form. My partners here from California, they were the first state to legalize medical marijuana back in 1996. Since then, multiple states have legalized medical marijuana. We are now up to 33 states in this country have legalized medical marijuana. Then we saw another interesting development, which is adult use marijuana. 2012, Colorado and Washington were the first states to legalize marijuana for adult use, meaning if you're 21 years or older, you can access cannabis for any purpose within those states. We now have 10 states and Washington, D.C. that have all legalized cannabis for adult use. So the big question is, federal law, as some of you may know, trumps state law. So how are we operating and how is this cannabis industry developing despite it being federally legal? I don't want to go into the details, but essentially it is enforcement policy. The federal government, the Department of Justice, has taken a hands-off approach to state legal industries. That's not to say it hasn't had effects on the industry. And because of this unique dynamic where it's illegal federally but legal in certain states, it's had a lot of unique outcomes. For example, access to banking is an issue. Many of the major banks don't want to provide services to cannabis businesses. Taxes, cannabis companies are taxed at an effective rate higher than general businesses. Certain federal protections aren't there, like bankruptcy. Cannabis companies don't have the ability to declare bankruptcy. Tony will talk about intellectual property more, but I think the most unique factor about this industry as a result of it being federally legal is sort of this state-by-state approach to the industry. Every state has basically developed their own laws and regulations, and you would think there's some uniformity among states, but it really is reinvention of the wheel every time a state legalizes marijuana. So when you think of this industry, I think it's important to think of each state as almost like its own country, with an embargo on products in and out of states. You really have to operate within your state. So that creates some unique circumstances for startup companies, for companies looking to scale, because you don't have the ability to just plug and play throughout each state. You really have to look at the laws and regulations of each state to make sure that your business is tailored to the laws of that particular state. Despite all the issues, the cannabis industry is growing at an extreme rate year over year. The investment levels in this space just continue to grow. Who's participating in this market? It's not your grower, your Uncle Joe who grows in his backyard anymore. We're seeing executives from Fortune 500 companies participating in this space. Now, I think, in fact, today there was some news that president of Kellogg's, some division of Kellogg's, just joined a cannabis company, at the executive level. What we're also seeing now is the emergence of multi-state operators. We're seeing companies that are trying to develop a national footprint in this sort of patchwork approach of going into each state and acquiring businesses operating there. So we're seeing a lot of companies trying to create a national presence. So all of these indicators are, not to mention public support continues to rise, but all of these factors are great indicators that federal reform is on its way. It's inevitable at this point. The question is when, not if.
Thank you. So another thing that we're seeing a lot of as the industry grows is M&A deals, right? We're seeing a lot of mergers and acquisitions. So Sander, can you tell us a little bit about what the current trends are and what it is that we're seeing and what are some of the issues?
Certainly. You probably read about some of the higher profile mergers and acquisitions in cannabis to date. A few weeks ago, Cresco bought Origin Labs for well north of $800 million. There was Harvest announcing a deal with Verano for about $800 million. A few months prior, the MedMen announced purchasing PharmaCann for $600 and something million. So there's billion-dollar M&A deals right around the corner. I would actually argue the first one's already here because sort of buried in those numbers is a much more significant deal, which was Canopy's option to acquire acreage, which, not to get too technical, but many of you have probably read about Constellation Brands' $5 billion Canadian investment in Canopy, which occurred in August of last year. That's a minority stake, but Constellation has the right to acquire a controlling stake. That's a very significant piece of news because Constellation is a New York Stock Exchange listed alcohol company and otherwise cannot invest in the United States federally illegal cannabis businesses. So by making their investment in Canopy and then Canopy having this follow-on option to purchase acreage, you now have a Fortune 1000, probably Fortune 500 actually, strategic U.S. investor that has exposure, not directly, it's through an option, but exposure to acquire a U.S.-based cannabis company when it becomes federally legal. So essentially that deal, if any of you read about it, was, I think, pretty significant. It's probably the first multi-billion-dollar deal in the space because when it becomes federally legal, Constellation has the right to acquire control of Canopy and has the option to buy acreage. And so that's a pretty significant deal. But M&A activity is heating up all over the space. Listen, I don't have the 2018 numbers. We're still a little, I don't know if those numbers have been published yet. Matt probably does, but I remember the 2017 numbers. And, there was something along the lines of $17 billion in legal pot sales in the United States, which sounds significant, but there were still, that's a total market size of something like 48 billion. So there's still a lot of illegal use, which hasn't come into legal use. So that's the size of the market. If you don't put any sophisticated marketing behind it, that's the pent-up demand. So there's quite a bit of recognition that the industry is growing, and consolidation is just sort of the natural evolution of that as people try to get bigger to compete.
So as we talk a little bit about M&A deals and consolidation, I think one of the things that is very, very important to anyone who's doing business in the cannabis industry is the importance of branding. And that leads us over to intellectual property. So Tony, can you tell us a little bit about some of the branding issues within the industry?
My name is Tony Handal. I'm a partner with the firm. I head up the IP practice group. My office is in San Diego. I've got a couple of my partners here, Justin McNaught and Sharon Urias. You heard the speakers talking about mergers, acquisitions, the value of the market. Well, a lot of it's driven by brand. Your IP usually drives value. People are not going around buying up and pulling together unknowns, moms and pops. The big money, the big transactions are centered around the big names. So brand is tremendously important. For us as lawyers, securing brand, securing protection for processes, it becomes complicated because of the state of the regulatory state at this time. So we've come up with a lot of creative ways to protect brands. For one, you can't get a trademark, federal trademark, on a cannabis-related brand or business. That's because trademark law descends from the Commerce Clause of the Constitution. If a product is not, you can't transact in interstate commerce in a product, you can't get a trademark on it. So consequently, you have to look to other ways to protect your processes, your company, develop your brand. There are state trademarks that are available. Trademarking in common law trademarking is available. It's one way to protect your brand. Copywriting is another way. You can't copyright a name, but you can copyright a particular unique logo of some sort. Patenting. There are processes now for patenting certain plants or methods of product production. But I think that's a stretch, because whatever you're going to try to patent these days has probably been around for quite some time. And so I'm not really high on the patent aspect of protecting your IP. Then there's the trade secret aspect, which is a little known conversation. If you have a way of doing something, you have a process, you have a pricing structure, treat them as a trade secret. Treat everything in your business as if it were, as they say, illegal. Because if you treat it that way, then you'll have the processes in place to make the argument that what you have is yours and protectable.
Thank you. So that's very interesting. So just to summarize, so you can't get a federal trademark registration at this point in time?
At this point in time, you cannot get a federal trademark registration on a business that deals in any illegal activity. But if you sell a line of T-shirts or oils or paper goods, things that are transactable in interstate commerce, then you stand a pretty good chance of getting a trademark and being able to protect a brand. So even though you're not actually trademarking a brand related to a cannabis product, nobody else can either. but at least you'll secure a brand on those other subsidiary categories.
Wow. So despite all of these issues that we're seeing on the regulatory side, we're still seeing that a lot of these companies are now gearing up to raise capital. So at the same time, there are a lot of people out there, I'm sure some people here in the audience, who are certainly interested in investment opportunities. So what are some of the investment issues that we're seeing now? Sander?
I think people are interested. It's mostly a tech conference, and people hear legal weed, and look at this. We got a nice crowd. Who knew, right? Well, in terms of investment, people aren't just gearing up for investments. The big dollar investments are here, and you know we could talk well beyond the allotted time on it. But I would say a few things. First of all, a lot of the easy money has been made in cannabis because the states that have become legal, particularly since you now have large vertically integrated players that are moving into multi-state, a multi-state phase of operations that, as Matt talked about, you're just getting a lot of competition now in the legal cannabis market. In fact, states like Oregon, for example, have a significant oversupply of product, and it's actually causing quite a bit of pain for the cultivators. So there's not as much money in growing pot anymore. One of the interesting consequences of federal illegality is you cannot legally move this product across state lines. So while you may have an oversupply of product in Oregon and you may have an undersupply of product in California, you can't move that product down from Oregon to California yet and sell it legally in the California market. So investments are becoming more sophisticated. They are resembling the Silicon Valley and Wall Street style investments that most companies here are probably seeking, to be perfectly frank. I mean, there's a whole lot of folks here that are probably looking for angel money through a SAFE or a convertible note. Then they will go into a Series A round, Series B round, et cetera, and then hope for some sort of a liquidity event, either through a sale or through a public offering. And that's really the same path that the cannabis companies are taking now. What used to be sort of a handshake deal and a lot of kind of funky structures that cannabis entrepreneurs might have been used to, because look, to be frank, a lot of these folks came out of what we call the black market, which is, you know, drug dealing. And they kind of came out of the black market and started trying to do it legally. But it took a while for the culture of cannabis to kind of catch up to other industries. And so now it's kind of caught up to really where technology is, where they think about their investments or investing in their businesses a lot like you folks do. And so it's that sort of a process.
And Matt, tell me a little bit about hemp and CBD, because this past year I've started to see CBD everywhere. It's in my smoothies, it's in my creams, it's in my chocolates. What is the regulatory framework for CBD?
Well, it's like on pizza. It's like in a topping for pizza now. It's crazy.
It's
it literally
everything.
is everywhere. Before I get to CBD, you really need to talk about hemp, because that's where this CBD is derived from. So formerly, our federal law didn't recognize the difference between cannabis and its cousin hemp. So it sort of got lumped together. This past December 2018, we saw a major event happen with the signing of the 2018 Farm Bill. So what that Farm Bill did is it distinguished between cannabis and hemp. And the difference is, under federal law, is the THC concentration. So it's under a certain threshold, it's basically considered hemp. So what they did with that is they took it off, they redefined it, they took it off the Schedule I controlled substance, and they passed a law that will create a commercial market for hemp. This is big for several reasons. All these issues that I described previously that affect the cannabis industry, whether it's banking, taxes, interstate commerce, all of those should be by the wayside. So we will have a marketplace for hemp. Right now, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is in the process of promulgating their regulations. So the new law has not been implemented yet. It's really not in effect. We're operating right now under an older law in 2014. But we should be there in the next few months. When it comes to CBD, the issues there still haven't disappeared as a result of the legalization at the federal level of hemp. The FDA still has jurisdiction over CBD products, and the issues there are when you're using CBD intended for health or wellness, there are certain implications at the federal level, and the FDA has, really stepped up, I guess recently, and acknowledged that we need to create a legal pathway for these CBD products because the industry really has moved ahead of the laws on this. So right now, the CBD products, there's an emphasis from the FDA on how you're marketing it, and if you're marketing it intended for a health or medical benefit, there's some issues there. They're trying to work through that, but until then, this whole CBD health and wellness industry is moving along while the FDA tries to scramble to figure out how they're going to allow these products to enter the market legally.
Very interesting. So, Tony, let's just go back to IP protection just once more. So, we've talked a little bit about the issues that we have with trademark. You've made a very interesting point about the fact that copyright may be available in some limited format, and patent protection and trade secrets. Can you just give us a few final comments on why it's important to even think about these things if we're talking about this industry?
Sure, thank you. Well, if you're going to build a real business, and I view the cannabis industry as any other industry that at its nascent stages, whether it's the steel industry, excuse me, the fast food industry, it all has some beginning. But what separates the good companies, the valuable companies from the ones that don't last, is their brand recognition, their quality, their identity. So IP is tremendously important. You can copyright what you have in your brochures and on your website. You can copyright and get protection for your logo. You can't get a trademark on your brand, except, Matt brought up a really good point, with the advent of the Farm Bill, hemp became legal, and you can transact hemp in interstate commerce. So if you want to brand, if you want to trademark your brand, sell hemp, and you can get a trademark. You'll be able to get a trademark ultimately for hemp. My partner, Justin, over there, he's one of the most creative guys I know when it comes to pushing through trademark protection and other name and brand and copyright protections for clients. It's a unique area, and it takes a little bit of a dance to get it past the authorities, but it's the cornerstone of any business, your identity. And was Matt, as Sandra will tell you, when people go to buy a company or they go to sell a company, they're selling their brand, and brand has value.
And so just a few final notes. We're here in the great state of Florida. So Matt, you are an attorney here in Florida, as am I. Can you just tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are with regard to the regulatory landscape here in Florida and what you foresee for the future here?
Sure. So Florida, we are a medical marijuana-only state right now. This is a very appealing market because of the demographics and the size, the patient patient population or just the citizen population, it's also a huge tourist destination. So this is a very appealing state for the market, both on the medical and potentially adult use market. Our laws have made it very restrictive as to who can participate in the market. So there's only a couple dozen companies that are allowed to participate in the market here. Those companies basically have unbridled discretion to the market. So they've created a free market system for a select few companies. That is likely to change, at least the business, the limited license structure, as well as the ability to do business with third parties. That's likely to change in the future. We see in each state, they start conservatively, and as time goes on and the sky doesn't fall, the legislature is more comfortable with easing the laws and regulations. So right now we do have a small market on the business side with a very large patient population that has drove the value of these companies who are allowed to participate in the market, has driven the values of these companies extremely high. On the hemp side, this is the last week of our legislative session, we are likely to pass a hemp bill pursuant to the new federal farm bill. So we will have a commercial hemp industry within the next year in Florida, a brand new industry in the state, low barriers to entry. So I'm very excited about this new industry that's really on the verge of just taking off here.
Fantastic. So we have just a few minutes left. Does anyone here in the audience have any questions?
Hi, Raymond Francois. I was just wondering, personal usage, especially for medical, are there any workings for reciprocity with the rest of the states on medical usage?
States treat reciprocity different. Some states will allow patient ID cards. Usually you get a patient ID card from other states. That will allow you access to medical marijuana within that jurisdiction because you can't travel with it. Here in Florida, we don't have state reciprocity. It's only available to residents and seasonal residents. So reciprocity here isn't available, but it is available in certain other states. It really is a state-by-state discussion. Unfortunately, we didn't get it through this session, but potentially next session, Florida may address reciprocity to allow visitors or non-residents to access medical marijuana here.
Anyone else? This lady right here. So let me just repeat the question because I don't think anyone heard her. So the question is with respect to merchant banking and credit cards within the space. So Sander, I think that's your area.
Well, there's a couple different items of legislation that are being considered. Nothing's been passed yet. So right now it's hugely difficult for cannabis companies to access the banking system at all. In fact, it's kind of a dirty little secret among the legal banking or the legal marijuana companies that they all have to kind of tap dance and do games to try to get any access to the banking system. And there's still a whole lot of commercial activity being done in cash. And in fact, somewhere around here, you've got companies that are working on blockchain solutions, and crypto tokens in the cannabis industry have been stuff that's been talked about for a while. And at some point, they'll either crack that code or one of these banking laws will be passed in Congress. I think the last one got hung up. I can't remember what. Matt might remember what happened to the last bill for trying to get some access to the banking system for cannabis companies. What's its?
Yeah, it's looking good on the House side. It passed some certain committee hurdles. I know there's some work to do on the Senate side.
Yeah. So hemp you can bank now. I actually have a CBD client who called up very proud that they got J.P. Morgan not only to bank them but lend to them. So, but the Farm Bill was just passed a few months ago, and they were the first CBD client of J.P. Morgan, and it took them quite a bit of convincing. But you know, if J.P. Morgan's willing to bank CBD companies, everybody will.
We have time for one more question. Anyone? Art. Only I think someone needs to give you a microphone because, or you have to come up here. We can't hear you.
You want us to film you while you're asking?
Is it okay?
Blockchain-based financial services?
Blockchain-based financial services. So we're definitely seeing some companies that are trying to create alternative financing systems within the industry. How that's actually going to play out, I think, is still questionable. I think that blockchain will play an important role within the cannabis industry, partly because of banking and fintech. But I do think that there are just regulatory hurdles that we're still going to have to keep in mind no matter what. Something else that becomes really interesting with blockchain technology, which is not with respect to banking, has to do with seed-to-sale tracking. And that's something that I'm actually very, very excited about, because one of the issues that you have within the cannabis industry, obviously, is especially if you're going to have medical marijuana, you need to be able to track everything from the very beginning all the way to the very end, make sure that all of the strains are accounted for and the like, and blockchain is something that's actually a technology that can be incredibly useful in the same way that we've already seen it become useful for enterprise companies that are dealing with supply chain like Walmart, frankly. So I'm very, very excited to see how this technology ends up playing into the industry, but exactly how, I think, is still a little bit uncertain.
They're telling us to wrap up. It's
All
like the
right, we have
Oscars.
to
The
wrap
music's going
up,
to come
so
on any second.
thank you all for coming.
Ushering
Thank
us
you
off
very
stage.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.